What's something that works really well with 200 to 300 students that could also work really well for like small class sizes that teachers might not be aware of?
My favorite is peer instruction and think, pair, share. Like those are my active learning is my favorites. Peer instruction especially, I think is useful because it is immediate feedback from the entire class of whether or not they understood the thing that you just told them. And my dissertation actually focused on how students get questions wrong. So I know a lot about how students screw up. It's fascinating. So that means also I can come up with really good distractors, really good wrong answers for multiple choice questions. Sometimes I even fool myself. When I was lecturing, when I was still like, I think it was the second or third time I was teaching the class, and I didn't yet have the correct answer in my notes. Like I fooled myself a couple times where like I see what the students did. I'm like, yeah, that's the right answer. I'm like, oh, wait, no, that's not the right answer. Like, because the majority of students chose the wrong answer. And I was like, I didn't pause and go, wait a minute, something's wrong.
And what does peer learning look like? So you mentioned like that as being a strategy. If it's a novice teaching a novice, how does that look in a learning space?
So in a learning space, the way that I do peer instruction is I pose the question to the class via some way that I can collect an answer from every single student. My main way to do it is Google Forms, but there's clickers and there's other ways to do it. And then you look at the results. And if 75% of the students did not get their question right, you're going to want them to discuss with their neighbor what the answer is. And if not even 35% of the students got it right, and obviously these are fudge numbers, you can kind of go up and down if you want. Less than 35% got it right, then you need to give them a hint because clearly they don't understand what's going on. And so after you have them discuss, usually there's some extra things you can do. Like you tell the group, like they have to come to a consensus. They have to agree before we do the second round. And so then you do round two. And round two is you ask them the exact same question. It's like, there's no change, like exactly the same. And then you see how the students did. And so if the students, usually at that point, the students will, where 75% will have found the right answer. And so at that point, then you go over the answer because clearly some students still didn't get it right. So you go over the answer and you can move on. If they don't, that's a clear sign you did not teach this thing.
Right.
And you need to try again. That I think can work in any classroom. And like watching academic Twitter, like part of me is kind of annoyed and part of me is like, yes, you have found peer instruction. Because like a lot of them are like, oh, Zoom is great because I can do polls. I'm like, you could do polls in the real world. You don't have to do polls on Zoom only. That mildly frustrates me. It's like, you could have done polls at any time, but you've just discovered them in Zoom. But like, at least you found them now. But peer instruction has been a thing for a long time. I hope you take this into the real world. And like, I think some of academic Twitter basically said like, this is what I'll miss when we go back to the real world. I'll miss polling in Zoom. And I'm like, you can do that in the real world.
Yeah, and peer instruction is one of those things that I personally, when I was asked to teach my peers and I was learning content, I learned so much from doing that. Like it is such a great learning tool, not only for the person who's receiving instruction, but also the person who's like having to do essentially the teaching of it, thinking of new ways to reframe, oh, how do I think of this concept in a different way and whatnot. Like it's very beneficial for everyone.
When you're first doing it, students are not going to want to do it. So you got to nudge them to do it. So like, I guess for anyone who's wants to try this for the first time, like I will tell you now, students will not want to do it first. And you just got to first set up the expectations that you want them to do this. And then you got to be kind of obnoxious about it. So the way that I did it is that I will wander around the room looking for people who are not talking to anyone. And I will literally sit down and go, hi, what's your name? And it's like, my name is Bob. Okay. And I turn to another student who's not talking. Hi, what's your name? My name is Kate. Kate, I'd like you to meet Bob. Bob, I'd like you to meet Kate. I have made this awkward, but now you could talk about the question. And then I go to the next and I keep going. And I don't know if this made it into, so Mark Guzdial and I talked about this, I think, in his podcast, on the CSED podcast. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this made the cut, but he also does something similar, but instead what he does, and he can only do it because he's an old white man. And he said this first. I did not say that first. He walks up to the student and starts singing. That's like the student that's all alone. He's like, you are all alone. And I'm like, yeah, you can only do that because you're a white man who also like does amazing work on the ukulele. He plays the ukulele. So he can actually sing. But yeah, he like slowly walks towards the student and starts like singing, you are all alone. And the student like eventually like scoots over and goes talk to someone. And then after I think a couple rounds of this, the students kind of get the message and they see him coming. They'll like start scooting over to talk to somebody.
Yeah. I like that. I like the idea of like, I'm going to do something awkward that makes it so it's less awkward to actually just engage in a conversation with your peer and whatnot. Another thing that I've often had to do is kind of like model and even practice. Here's how you can help somebody. Like, don't just get frustrated with them because they don't understand it the same way as you. Like, here are some questions you can ask and whatnot.
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 51, which is titled Learning at Scale with Kristin Stephens-Martinez. You can listen to this full episode, as well as hundreds more, by simply searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app, or by going to jaredoleary.com.